Okay. Good morning, everyone. That's a typical picture of day 2. Everyone moves a little bit further to the front, and the back is sadly empty. I did not go singing last night, I promise. Thanks very much for coming back for the second day here. And of course, thank you very much for a very, very successful first day. I think that was, in terms of summits that we've done, I think that was the most successful that we've had so far. So thank you very much for making that happen with us here. Today we're going to have our sponsor talks with a little bit of lifecycle management sprinkled in there. And then in the afternoon, we're going to have what I call here working groups. So the idea is that some of you that have specific topics can gather and solve problems while you're face-to-face. So we wanted to have a little bit of an interactive slot in there. I know that our carrier colleagues wanted to have some time to huddle. Maybe that's today. I know we have some low-level API topics that we can close while we're all here. Things like that is what we're going to do in the afternoon. And then we're also going to have 2 presentations about security and what that actually means in the CPE space and how some of our newer members plan to address that and where that can go. But as I said, we'll start our day here with a presentation from SmartRG, who are going to talk to us. David is going to talk to us about Purple WT for commercial products. So let's practice the clapping, and let's get David on stage here.
Okay, I'm the silver one. There we go. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm just going to get right into it. Before I introduce myself, I wanted to talk a little bit about what it takes or what exactly is a sellable product in our space. I've illustrated our operating system that we call SmartOS. But on the surface of it, a CPE stack is really a collection of marketable features that's requested by operators such as some in the room with us today. You know, you see the typical elements there, all the non-differentiating features, and plus everything that we build up on top, right? Lots of elements there that actually make a marketable product. But what is often unseen and not understood is the stack has deep and far-reaching dependencies and really complex systems underneath. And we've illustrated them here with the iceberg, as you can see. So all of these components are necessary simply to participate and sell in this space that we're in today, in the CPE space, and really have a competitive advantage or any form of product differentiation. You've got all this baseline functionality that has to be built. So real quick, that's kind of our problem statement, if you will. I'm just myself. My name is David Lacanina. I've been working in our space for the last 20 years or so. And then just recently, I've been with SmartRG about 7 years. Last year, SmartRG was acquired by Adtran. So we were a tech startup, if you will, but now we've got really the size and backing of a large corporation behind us. Just a couple KPIs, if you will, for what SmartRG is. So we've got around a little over 800 broadband service provider customers across the globe. It's about 1.5 million devices that are managed per month on our device management platform, which is a globally deployed SaaS platform, and over 3 million actual CPE devices in service. So it's a fairly small team. We've grown, obviously, since the Adtran acquisition. So right now we're at 120 personnel, with just under 70% of our personnel focused in actual software engineers. I wrote engineering, but really I should have said software engineering. What we call the subscriber solutions and experience value stream within Adtran is specifically focused on software. We have CPE hardware, but the hardware staffing comes from a different group within Adtran. It's a shared resource. So yeah, almost 70% software engineers. And really the crux or the intent of why Adtran brought us on was really to help move us towards this open ecosystem that we all talk about, and to provide a greater degree of in-home services. I already told you about myself. Okay, so until now, this is really the way that you service providers that are here with us and vendors such as ourselves, SmartRG, develop what we call dead-end devices, if you will. This is kind of the dirty secret of our space. I see some nodding heads from some of fellow vendors in the room. So what that looks like typically is you start out with a vendor SDK, and for better or for worse, what that really is a bunch of, we like to say, bloated binary blobs. So lots of closed source elements that we cannot manipulate, and you, the operator, of course, also have no access to. We then add a bunch of redundant work. So every time we want to build something, we build to that target, but the next time when you have a new target that you want to build toward, you understand the dirty secret, right? We've got to do all that work over again. And we're talking about baseline features, nothing that differentiates ourselves, right? We keep doing this. And so we make one-off investments every time we want to bring a new product to market. And you, the operator, you end up with less choice and a more expensive CPE. And it takes forever to get it to market, as you know. We heard from several yesterday. And the service providers, you've told us you've had enough of this. You're done with closed source CPE software environments, being constrained by any one vendor SDK with limited flexibility, no extensibility. We're done. I think I want to take a step back also, and even talk about just a single feature, not a specific feature, but just a feature, and acknowledge that there's really a shadow, if you will, when it comes to any feature, whether it's differentiating or not. Of course, any feature needs to be maintained. It has to be updated, and oftentimes it'll need to be enhanced in order to keep up with whatever's going on in our space, right? So we're continually increasing the resources that are needed just to maintain any software product. And so the level of time dedicated to maintaining even legacy features kind of is proportional, if you will, to the number of platforms you support. So it can get ugly really quickly. And if you want to really see the whole effort, you need to take all three types of development into account. So starting at the bottom, you've got all the maintenance you do, managing upgrades, patches. Then you build in the common baseline features that give you little to no differentiation. And then finally, whatever time is left over, we can spend on building, the marketable differentiating features. So that looks pretty ugly. And one way to deal with this, as we've done over the years, is simply to accept those facts and try to ramp up your software development team in order to maintain all these non-differentiating features, right? Of course, this is the message I think we are all trying to hammer home. There's a better way. If we come together as a community and work on the common features, the baseline features that don't give us differentiation, there's no reason why we can't, because again, they're non-differentiating. We've all got to do it. Why do we keep working in parallel, building nothing exciting, nothing new? But if we do that, we come together as a community, then that allows us, vendors and service providers alike, to free up those resources that were focused on those baseline features and actually build differentiating services and products. And of course, what we get is we get faster time to market, and of course the products are better. And that's really the essence of what we call SmartOS at SmartRG. A little bit more about that. So just kind of another way to visualize it. So if all development is carried by a single company, then of course, as I alluded to earlier, 100% of that effort is going to have to be handled by just that single engineering team within that company. But of course, this is one way of looking at it. Would you share the effort along the lower two layers? Then again, we can refocus all those resources towards the development of those differentiating features. And so by freeing up those resources to develop the differentiating features and services, well, I should say that's not the only advantage. If we can harmonize this new ecosystem, we can do a lot more. So we can reduce the number of target software stacks and platforms. We can make it easier for our chipset manufacturers to support more customers with less demands on their resources as well. And then likewise on the service integration side, that only needs to happen once. So if you've got a value-add service like a security application, to be able to integrate it just once, and rather than every single time you want to work with a new partner or a new customer or a new platform, you've saved a ton of resources. So if you apply the open source logic to the CPE space, we all know we get purple WRT, and that's illustrated here in this simple block diagram. And then based on that, we at SmartRG have built what we call SmartOS. So you can see below or above OpenWRT and the Purple WRT framework, we bring in our differentiating apps and services, build on that application layer for bringing in cloud services and up on top of that. So really what we wanted to tell you about, the most important thing that I wanted to say today was it's here now. So right now we've announced just yesterday in a press release the availability of 3 commercial at-market products we've been shipping for some time, but now what we call SmartOS 11, the first commercially available Purple WRT products focused in the carrier space. And so we kind of wanted to have a bit of a breadth. So the first 3 products represent first a Wi-Fi router, secondly a DSL integrated access device, and then thirdly a Wi-Fi Mesh AP. Each of them, as you can see, based on a different vendor silicon. So that we've delivered on the promise of Purple WRT and hardware abstraction. And then later next year, we'll bring on GPON, XGS-PON, as well as, of course, Wi-Fi 6 from the various silicon vendors you see there. So kind of as I close up here, I really want to make the call and urge every one of us that we can do more. If every single one of us in the room, every single company represented in the room were to dedicate just 1 or 2 resources to Purple WRT and the other Purple projects, we can offload so many more tasks to the group that, again, the non-differentiating features and services that are requested and required by operators, even the ones that we heard from on yesterday's panel. So to summarize, contribute. If you're an OEM, you can contribute to Purple. In order to share the burden of those non-differentiating services, the maintenance, et cetera, and free up those resources to help you build compelling new services. If you're an operator, please continue to maintain pressure on your silicon vendors to support Purple and stop buying closed source devices, because that's the only way you're going to change the industry. And then for you software service vendors in the room, encourage you to integrate just once on Purple WRT and enjoy the benefits of having available so many numerous different platforms from various vendors, various silicon vendors, and then, of course, naturally having that reach into so many more operators. So that's the end of my slide decks. Any questions? That was way too easy.
One
Yes.
second, I just need to get the microphone, sorry.
Hi, Mika Lehtinen from F-Secure. So, yes, so I was wondering that is there a way to know to which extent the Purple APIs have been implemented on a particular device or vendor solution, or can we assume that they are implemented in full extent? I mean, as a software vendor, if we would utilize those APIs.
If I hear you correctly, you're asking which APIs, Purple APIs, are implemented at this time? So on those products, since the high-level API is not actually completed yet, we've abstracted it ourselves. However, as the high-level API projects are completed, then we'll, of course, naturally merge into that and harmonize around that. Likewise, the low-level API. So today we've done a lot of that work ourselves within SmartRG. And so, again, as those projects complete, we'll come into compliance there.
Okay, but just like starting integration, so would it be possible to know somehow, like which APIs are available in some release?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing.
Okay.
Can the sound person put some of that microphone in the monitor feed if we have it? I'm sorry, just not able to hear you.
Okay, so yeah. So as a software vendor, in order to integrate with the Purple WRT, for example, it would be really interesting to know to which extent the APIs have been implemented on that particular release. So what would be the standard way or kind of normal way to figuring out which APIs would be available to use?
Okay, yeah, that's typical software release notes.
Okay.
And of course, we can interact more closely together in a partnering way as well, whether it be through the Purple community or directly vendor to vendor.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Andika.
Hey, Can you show us again the slide where you have all the layers, all the...
Sure.
Sorry. Yeah, so what is exactly, I mean, the difference there between OpenWRT and Purple WRT? I mean...
Yeah, this is obviously a very simplified diagram, Indika. I don't think we've really call out the differences there. Of course, with the framework, you know, there's some elements like, let's see, what have I got there? So DSL, obviously, and as we add fiber, those are going to be elements that are specifically Purple WRT modules, whereas, of course, things like DNS, et cetera, those are right out of
And this would be upstream to OpenWRT, or what's the plan with that?
Yeah, absolutely. For instance, DSL uses the DSL framework.
And all the Smart OS is your proprietary part?
I'm sorry?
The Smart OS part, the green part,
Yes,
this is
yeah.
all your proprietary things, right?
That's where what?
Your proprietary stuff.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Thanks, Indika.
So maybe I can just add on as the one of the Purple WRT people in the room. That's actually a very good question. What is the difference? And I was trying to explain that yesterday in the talk. There is no difference. So Purple WRT is by now somewhat of a staging tree of OpenWRT. There is no divergence. We might be ahead a little bit with a couple of commits, but those all go upstream. And that is exactly what you see in the gray box. And then on top, you have optional packages, so there are no base platform changes. They're all in packages and feeds that go on top of what you get out of the GitLab, out of the Git repositories. That's also to the question before, how to start integration. Sorry for stealing your thunder.
Not at all.
To start the integration, the easiest is to go to the GitLab, get the platform down, do your integration, put them in feeds and packages, whatever, and then the integration would be quite easy, because that all comes from OpenWRT. Any other questions in the room? Okay. Thank you very much, David.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I'm just checking. We have a lot of extra time. We have a lot of time for coffee. You weren't supposed to be done until 10:15. Wow. Okay, yeah, you get the half hour back from yesterday that we ran over. But maybe this is a good opportunity. I'm not sure if anyone is actually in a demo room, but I've seen some people outside that should man the demos. So how about we just do that? Unless, Joao, I just saw you. We can also accelerate everything by half an hour and that makes you half an hour earlier, if that's fine. Yeah? Then how about we do a 15-minute break now, and then we have Joao. Is that okay? Everyone's nodding. Awesome. Let's get coffee. Are we live? Yeah, awesome. That was day 2, 15 minutes. I'll set myself a timer next time instead of just gazing. Thanks everyone for coming back. There's still a couple of people outside that promised they would come back in any minute, so I thought let's just give it a go and get show back on here. The next topic that we have is, I mentioned that yesterday already, is a little bit of a novel story for Purple and the foundation, where we're trying to be more product focused and also bring more requirements into that. And it is an effort that deals with lifecycle management. I'm not going to take too much away, but it is the first product working group that we have in Purple, so I'm quite happy that we got Joao here from Vodafone, who's going to go into the details where the project comes from and where it's headed over the next 12 months. So please welcome Joao to the stage here.
Thanks, Mirko.
So you just click forward here.
Okay. Okay, so for the people who don't know me, my name is João Freitas. Basically, I work for Vodafone Group as an architect in the fixed devices domain in a team based Germany. And before I start my presentation, I would like to thank this audience for being here and also for being very active. I think one of the reasons why it makes this kind of events very successful is being here in a very open way and asking questions. Because one of the messages that I would like to say is, don't be afraid to ask questions. If you feel there's something that you don't understand, if you have a different opinion about anything, it's very, very important that you open up and raise it. Because being in a community and being open is just not about doing documentation, make all the information available. Naturally, that's important. But more than that, it's actually about having a voice and sharing your inputs. So before I jump into the actual agenda, I just want to apologize if I need to pause and on off, just to cough. I'm not at my best days today. Purple LCM is actually, or LCM as lifecycle management, is actually a topic that has been brought already in this conference before. If my memory does not fail me, we had a presentation 2 years ago from Technicolor where they tried to talk about what they were doing. Last year, we had a presentation from Stettel, which is a company working with a Vodafone, where they demoed for a smart home proposition where I'm not mistaken, we actually showed the light bulb coming here. But this year, I actually want to talk from a more business side perspective, why these things are important and what can we expect with this kind of initiatives and why working as a community is important. So in order to do so, what I have for the agenda today is I'd like to spend a couple of time talking about customers' perspective, how the customer sees the internet today and the router, if we can do anything in order to change that, because sometimes doing lifecycle management is not just about technology change. It's also about how the customer sees us and if he can trust us to provide more services on top. Then I will talk about some opportunities for services, because this is a question that we get asked a lot. Okay, we want to develop services, but what are we talking about? And I think that's a very valid and important question that we need to start talking more often. Then I'll move into talking what firmware management looks like as of today, and if there's anything that we can do in order to change that. I will also spend a couple of minutes talking about where we are as in the industry. what are the things that we can do to improve, because that was also one of the topics that we heard yesterday. So we are doing a lot of things, but sometimes we can do better. We can find more ways of optimizing the work. And then finally, I'll talk how we see Purple Foundation as an engine for doing this kind of work, what we expect to see Purple doing, because that's a question that Mirko and other people were actually raising, and I think we need to answer that to get a bit more direction on the actual work that we are doing, how we can actually get involved, or I see a lot of members here. I think it's also important for you to understand how you can become part of these initiatives. And finally, I'll have a little time for some questions and answers. So if there's really anything that you don't understand, I mean, feel free to raise it. We can talk about it. So having that said, first things first, if we look at how customers sees the internet or the service providers, or what they expect from the service, you will see a trend that's actually everywhere, which is they want more every year. So if we are talking about internet, they want more speed, they want better latency. And why does this happen? Well, first of all, there are obviously technological advancements, right? We don't watch a standard video these days. We talk about HD, full HD, ultra HD, and it just keeps evolving. What was good enough yesterday is no longer good enough tomorrow. So that's how humans behave, and this is something we will never get rid of. There will always be something else that we can do. So we know this is here, and we shouldn't try to fight back. We should really try to see how we can actually deliver, because if we understand what our customers want, then we can keep on having a healthy business. But on the other side of the spectrum, we also have an arrow going down, which is price. So, right, it's when somebody gets used to a service like the internet, you just use it on a daily basis. It just becomes something natural, like drinking water. So people actually take these things for granted, and they say, hey, this is important, but they don't realize all what's happening behind the scenes, and they just want it for free. They want to. There are even people who think everybody should have internet access for free, and this is actually where the problems start to come in, because in order to improve the service, we need to buy new technology, we need to invest, and on top of that, if we need to decrease the prices, how can we make a living out of this? How can we actually make some revenue change? So I think this puts us in a position where we have essentially two options, and I actually realize you cannot see the arrows, but the only thing that I wanted to say is that we can continue to work in this upper side of the picture, where we are just a connectivity service or a connectivity gateway. And if we do that, we know how the story ends. We just go back to the loop. Next year, they will demand more, they will expect cheaper, and this is not sustainable. On the other side of the spectrum, we can try to become a bit more. We can try to offer applications gateways. We can try to solve more problems that the customer has. And then we can start to think of generating new revenue sheets. So I think that was already enough as a presentation about customer expectations. But I just wanted to do a quick analogy to also routers, and to actually how customers also see the service from a technology point of view. And I think the best way to do this is if you would try to explain a kid how the internet works. I think one explanation that I hear often is the internet is pretty much works like a post service, right? When you open a web page and you type google.com or purple.org, basically what we are doing is you're sending a message, tell me, I want to see the contents of this website, and then you get it back. But why I'm actually talking about this, the reason why I'm talking about this is because when you look at what Amazon is doing with the delivery center, it's actually something similar, which is they are selling things that people were already buying before, but they are delivering. And each time people want to receive the items faster, before we could afford to wait 1 week, now people don't even want to wait 2 days. It needs to happen right away. And on top of that, they don't want to pay for it. They want it for free. So I think this, like I said, puts us in a situation, but the good thing is that the router is actually the distribution center, which means that if we don't provide a stable service, the customer will not be happy. And that's a very strategic positioning to be, because then the customer can see us as being valuable. But having that said, if the router and we service providers are just a distribution center, what can we actually do about services? So in order to answer that question, I would like to refer to our peers in the mobile space. And I would like to remember us that smartphones weren't always smart. If we look back in the days, this was a device that pretty much we were using to send messages. Then we were doing voice calls. Suddenly, we had basic internet connectivity, and we could see some basic websites in a text format. Then we started taking photos. We started recording video. We started having emails. Then it became a GPS. Then it became a music player, and so on. It just keeps happening. And why did this happen for mobile devices? I think it happened essentially for 2 reasons. One is because there was new technology coming in, so it's natural that you can leverage that to do more stuff. On the other side of the spectrum, what we are starting to see is the customer had more devices, and they wanted to start consolidating those, right? I still remember when I was a kid, I wasn't very fond of having a mobile device and having my MP3 player, then having another camera. It's just too much burden to carry all this stuff. So I think the reason why this happens is because this also started consolidating multiple devices, and the device that actually took all that logic was the smartphone. Why? Because the smartphone was actually the connectivity device. So having that said, I want to ask us if it's possible to actually do something similar for the fixed devices domain, because this is the question that we need to answer. So again, looking a bit on the history of the gateway. So back then, we just had modems, right? We could only connect one device and have internet connectivity. And sometimes we would even have to buy special hardware to have that connectivity. Later on, this modem also started to embedding a switch, and one device became 2. We could connect multiple devices. Then it was Wi-Fi. This device became free. And now we also have IoT. We are starting to see some gateways where the gateway actually becomes the smart home hub. So you start to see the gateway actually absorbing more devices and becoming as one, because there is a value in doing that. But if you look also from a service perspective, because that's the question, do we actually have service on the gateway? And the answer is yes, there are services out there today. The difference is they are non-monetized. So we have guest networks, which solves a problem that actually most of us has, which is I have my internet, I have all my devices connected at home. Maybe I have my security cameras. Maybe I have my backup server, and so on. And I don't want to open up and expose all my information to somebody who is just a guest. The only thing that I want to do is actually provide some connectivity. Or maybe I don't want to have a performance impact. So that's actually a service. Then we have other little features such as file sharing, printer sharing, boost device, and so on. Well, mobile backup, it's arguably a monetizable service because you actually have to pay for a SIM card. But the point I'm trying to make is there are some services already on the device, and the bottom is that because they are already embedded in the firmware, the customer doesn't even perceive them as being a device. I still remember when I had my first iPhone. It was a very good phone. I really liked it, but I had to install an app to actually import my contacts from the SIM card. Can you imagine having a service to doing that today? No, because that's a feature that's already there. So that's what I'm trying to say. This is also a matter of perspection, of having a way of telling the customers that they can opt in and out of service. And I think that's something important to do. But what can we actually monetize on that? Because we don't just want to build services without actually creating new revenue, because that's a lot of effort and we are not helping the business grow. So I think there are actually some answers out there when we look at third-party developers, but essentially what we need to do is look into the problems that the customer have and try to solve them, because that's essentially how you do business. You need to solve problems that exist. You don't need to make up things and then you don't know if you're going to be selling them or not. So having that said, smart Wi-Fi is actually a very good example. Smart Wi-Fi is probably the biggest reason why customers complain, and you start to see that they are actually starting to pay more for having better Wi-Fi. It could be in the form of buying new hardware, like an extender or so on, or it could even be paying an extra fee with a service provider that you have more pods, or you actually have a smarter decision making. So there's actually a business case out there. Another example is naturally parental controls, which is something that we already had in the past for some time, but it was a bit primitive. Today we are actually starting to see a bit more like content filtering, which is actually a real service. You need to constantly update your databases. You need to know exactly which websites are gamings, which ones are social networks, and so on. So it's actually a service that you can provide. On the other side of the spectrum, you also have smart homes, right? If you look at, I think the smart home is actually an interesting use case, because a lot of people already have smart devices, but there's this entry barrier, right? If you want to have maybe a light bulb with Zigbee, you need to buy this extra cabs. Sometimes it costs 100 euros, sometimes it can be a bit cheaper, sometimes it can be more expensive. But the point I'm trying to make is, once you have this entry barrier, some customers are not opting in. So the residential gateway, which is the device that actually provides the connectivity, if it embeds those interfaces, it can actually be a good opportunity to help expand the IoT and sell more devices. Philips Hue is already doing this. So they actually have new light bulbs where you don't need to buy the Zigbee bridge. You can connect with your Bluetooth device because they see that they need to break this barrier, and we have the opportunity to do that. Then we have, for example, dynamic OS, right? And here, I could be talking about two different use cases. There is the scenario where the device can actually prioritize one specific device with some different kinds of techniques like shaping and so on. But there's also, with the power of software-defined networks, you can actually have an end-to-end QoS, and that could be a sellable product as well. So basic scenario could be you have somebody using your internet and you are doing home office and you don't want to have your services being disrupted. So there's a market there. Another one is, for example, network scanners or security propositions. So I actually have a friend who has a lot of IoT devices at home, and he asked me, okay, so I start having all these Alexas, Google Homes, and so on at home, but how do we actually make sure that somebody is not hacking into my system and breaking my things? And I think, again, the gateway can actually be a way for shielding these devices. So there's actually a real problem that customers have that we can try to solve as being this distribution center. The last example that I wanted to share today is about privacy, right? With all these social networks, all these things happening around, we have a lot of people concerned about privacy. So VPNs are actually becoming one service which is getting more and more popular, and sometimes it's not just possible to install it on your laptop. There are devices out there that you cannot install apps, like for example, if you have a Wi-Fi light bulb, you cannot just install a VPN there. But if you embedded this functionality in your home router, you can actually protect the whole network in one go without all this software. So, and I could actually talk about more use cases, but I think this is already a good starting point. So, having that said, I think we should consider if we should start renaming our devices to actually smart routers. And we actually had the previous presentation, we had the smart OS. I think that blends quite well. And the reason for that is smartphones did it, and it's only when they did it that they could actually sell cheap, more expensive device. Apple and Google could not afford to sell devices for 1K euros or US dollars if they were not smart in the first place, right? So in the fixed domain space, we cannot sell more if we don't add more services. So we also need to start changing the customer perspective, how he sees the service provider and how he sees the router. And this is where I challenge the industry to also consider calling the devices as smart routers as opposed to just being routers. But are we prepared from a technology point of view? I think this is where things start to get a bit more complicated. If you want to introduce a new feature today, you need to obviously develop that, put effort in doing it. Afterwards, you need to create a new firmware release. That leads to a new testing cycle, field trials, because you want to really make sure that you are not breaking anything, you are not disrupting the customer experience. And all these cycles actually lead to a poor time to market, which actually means the customer is not very happy because he needs to wait. And we know how the new generations are actually, including my own generation. We want things right away. We don't want to wait one year. If we don't do it fast, they will just look for a different place to be. But even if we solve this time to market problem, each customer is still different. So we cannot really afford to adding all services and functionalities and putting them into a firmware. Imagine going to your smartphone, no matter how expensive it is, and downloading or installing all your applications that are available out there. It doesn't work. There are not enough resources. So you need a way to actually opt in and out of these functionalities without naturally breaking down, disrupting the service. So what can we actually do about this? So I think this slide is more a summary of pretty much what I said before. So right now we have this big black box which contains everything, and depending on the business model of service providers, sometimes it's not even well understood what's inside it. And I think we need to move into what I've included in the right side of the picture, which is we separate the middleware, which is the basic and core functionality, and have this set of deployable, independent, manageable units. And I've added this little box around them just to express the need to contain them in a way that if something goes wrong, it does not disrupt your service. So imagine if every time you open YouTube on your smartphone would reboot or crash. Would you have it there in the first place? Probably not. And the same applies to any other application. So we need to do it in a dynamic way, and we also need to make sure we don't break the device. Where are we actually in terms of market solutions? So today I would say that we have a set of proprietary solutions, and some of them are actually open source, but open source doesn't actually make it a standard, doesn't actually make it usable. And no matter which approach you have, you still have common problems out there. You don't have common set of APIs. You don't have the same dependencies or integration processes, which means that if a service provider relies to different implementations, because that's pretty much what happens today in many cases, we still need to have this burden of doing the same thing in different ways, and that just creates a lot of pressure on us. It's not a very efficient way of working. So there are a couple of problems here, and I actually prefer to call them opportunities that we can work together to solve, and I think Purple can actually be a good place to do so. Why? Because yesterday we actually had discussions about defining APIs, defining specification, that sometimes we need to fail fast, and we need to make sure that the development team is also contributing feedback to it. And here at Purple we have carriers, we have gateway manufacturers, we have silicon vendors, so we have all the people that we need to make sure that we can do it in a way that actually works. Okay, and Mirko also raised an important question yesterday, which is, what do we expect from Purple? Personally, and also talking from a Vodafone perspective, we would like Purple to translate all I'm saying into a set of deliverables or work items, and do it in a way which is open. And like I said at the start of this presentation, being open is just not about creating documentation, putting out there, making sure it's accessible, is actually giving voice to people and being able to contribute back. Because this is something that I see in a lot of industries, a lot of communities. Many times we see standardization and community efforts as a way to, I go to the community and I expect the work to be already done, so I just take it. But no, that's not how we actually work. You need to go there and also voice out your concerns. And the good about this is you have a voice. You can actually you are actually empowered to change and shape the future. And that's a big win of being here at Purple. So basically we have 4 items, which is we'd like to see open requirements, open specification, reference implementation, and a certification test suite. And I'm going to go through one by one, so not trying to rush on those ones. So requirements, why do we need them? So there are a couple of reasons, but in order to summarize this in a couple of words, essentially what we want to achieve is we want to make sure that at least there's a common set of functionality provided, right? Sometimes we have business models and some historical reasons that we need to work with different suppliers. And that means that we need to make sure that there's space for differentiation, but there's also a set of reusable functionalities that we need to make sure that they are there, right? If we are talking about LCM, there are a couple of items that we have, but just a very basic example. If we define that it's important to have a feature like backup the configuration, we need to make sure that there's a common set of implementations that do this. And we need to do this in the form of open requirements, so that we also shortcut these discussions with vendors where we say, hey, this is missing, that is missing. If we do this in an open way, you know up front what we need, and the whole process gets actually simplified. But then we also have the question, which is, where do we draw the line? I don't think I'm in a position that I can answer that question today, but I think there are at least 3 main areas from an LCM perspective that we can already start looking at. I think we can define a minimal set of use cases or features that we like to have. I think it's also important to include some security constraints in order to avoid breaking the device. And naturally, there's also some value in the packaging format, and I'll briefly talk about that. So quick one on this slide. So from a feature set, I think there are essentially three things. From a service, what we want to do is actually pretty simple. We want to download and install new services. Why do we want to do this? Because we want to extend the capabilities that we offer to devices, and we want to do it in a dynamic way. Secondly, we also need to be able to update them. Why? It could be a security patch. It could be a new feature that we introduce. And the reason why it's important to do it independently from the firmware release is from a time-to-market perspective, right? If you have an update in one, I don't know, if you're a smart home proposition or web GUI, why should you wait for 5 months to do that if you can do that right away? There's really no reason. And naturally, there's the complementary feature, which is removing services, because we also want to make sure that we run our devices in an efficient way. So if there are features that are not being used, we want to be able to remove them so that we can free space. And having that said, I've included some services in the initial of the presentation. I talked about, for example, file sharing. I talked about printer sharing. But if you look at these services, these are functionalities that most of our devices have, but how many customers are actually using them? They are probably not even aware. I'm seeing from the audience 0. So why do we actually have them consuming memory there in the first place? So if we have LCM, we can actually remove them and free up resources to add new capabilities. So I think that's a very important use case that we have out there. Then there's actually a configuration, right? We want to also be able to back up and restore the configuration. Why? It could be that the customer does a factory reset to device, and we don't want to give them that burden of having to remind the passwords or the IP address of the device or the host name. We want to give him the opportunity to recover that configuration, which he probably even doesn't remember. And we also want to make sure that if for some reason a device breaks or if we upgrade him to a new device, we can make sure that we can move that away with a new device. So I see that a lot of people stick with the same operating system on the smartphone devices because it's so simple to migrate. It's not my intention to promote Apple on this presentation, but one of the actual reasons why I stuck to that is because I actually have photos or messages from the first phone that I have. I can actually migrate this on and off, and we can do the same here as well. The last use case that I have about services is also about troubleshooting. Troubleshooting is essential for providing a good customer support. We had Mike and other people here yesterday talking about telemetry and so on. We need to have a way of understanding what's happening with the device, and we also need to do it in a dynamic way. Okay, talking about constraints. Why do we need constraints? So essentially, we want to avoid adding capabilities while having the gateway to reboot the device. We don't want to also increase the response times of the device. If you look, for example, at statistics about web browsing, 25% of the users, if I'm not mistaken, if the web page takes more than 4 seconds to load, 25% opt out. They just get frustrated. They don't want to do it anymore. And that's actually one problem that we can have. Enforcing security constraints is just not about preventing reboots, crashes, errors. It's also about making sure that the performance actually remains compatible with the user's expectations. So in order to do so, I think we have a couple of points here. We need to have some sort of system-related resources like CPU, either in the form of CPU caps, prioritization, whatsoever. There can be different flavors. We need to be able to have memory. We have a lot of technical people here as well, and I think already a lot of people already heard about memory leaks. This is something that affects everybody. We need to prevent those. We also have storage conflicts, and naturally, something that I don't hear people talking that often, but this can actually be important, is we also don't want some services to consume too much bandwidth, right? Because sometimes there are bugs out there, and you don't want, maybe you have a smart home device there, and you have a poor link. You don't want that device to just consume your whole bandwidth because you have on the device. You also need to have a way to make sure it doesn't disrupt that. And lastly, and very important as well, is APIs. The moment we open up, we have this concept of downloadable components. We cannot just open up all the APIs available on the gateway. We need clear defined APIs, and we need to make sure that a specific service can only access the required resources. Coming back to the smartphones world again, everybody sees this concept where you install one app and then it needs access to the camera. It's not accessing to the camera without the user consentment. So I'm not saying we need to have exactly the same concept, but we need to have a way of specifically telling this app can only access A, B, and C. Otherwise, it's not possible to make it secure. Packaging. So what is actually included into a package? Naturally, we need to have the service, which are the binaries, the functionality that we are extending. It's arguable if we need to add also the dependencies, or at least have some sort of mechanism that if a dependency is not there, it can depend on a different downloadable component, but there needs to be something to manage this. Naturally, there's also the need to include some configurations. Why? Because it's actually possible to change how a service behaves without changing the source code. We can also change the configuration and make some behavioral changes on the fly, and it's also important to have that flexibility there. And lastly, there are naturally the constraints, right? Because you will not know the constraints up front, right? You have your framework there, but you develop your services afterwards, so how can the gateway know up front that it requires only 5% CPU and it requires access to APIs, ABC? No, you need to do this. Hey.
It'll probably die. The red light means the battery's low. Here, I'll get the replace it.
Thank you. I think this is actually telling me to speed up the presentation. No, but we still have time. So yeah, I mean, having that said, I think there's an opportunity to also try to standardize and harmonize this a bit, because if we don't do so and we have different implementations, then for a service provider, it becomes really difficult to manage the service, right? If I have the same service with similar constraints, I don't want those constraints to depend on the technology. I want to make sure that they are abstractable, right? And I think this is possible, because if you look, for example, some technological use cases such as Wi-Fi, right? We have Wi-Fi B, G, N, AC, AX. There are always new things coming in. But the APIs, from a customer perspective, don't necessarily change much, right? They still change the SSID, the network SSID. They still change the Wi-Fi password. And it's the same with the multi-access points network. So it doesn't matter if the device has one Wi-Fi node, 2 device nodes free, he still does the same operations. And we need, so I really think it's possible to, regardless of which technologies we use, to have some sort of harmonization on those things. Because the technology is just a means to an end. Okay, about specifications. So I think one of the things that carriers providers learn the hard way is that integration, especially now that we have third-party developers, is not easy. A lot of projects' efforts seem to be very underestimated. And one of the things, I think this picture with a puzzle really describes the problem that we have here. We don't want to spend 1 year, 2 years picking up all the little pieces, and suddenly we find out there's one small little piece and it doesn't fit anywhere. That's a big problem. That's a situation you don't want to be in. So having that said, the message that I want to convey with specification is that sometimes the requirements are not sufficient in order to explain what we need. There's also a value in having some implementation guidelines, because the same service, the same functionality can actually be integrated in different ways. And this picture actually illustrates two use cases. It's possible to have a service that binds directly to the IPC bus if you have rich enough APIs, and I think that's a good way of doing it, because then you can enforce access controls and you can have some error handling and so on. You do it without getting too deep into the integration. Another way of doing it is going through configuration files, and sometimes this happens because the APIs that we have are not rich enough. And while this can work, this can be problematic. Why? Because the moment you start messing around with configuration files, there's no validation on what you are doing, right? It's just a text file. You can actually, giving one example, you have a Wi-Fi channel, right? From a text file perspective, Wi-Fi channel can be like 1, 6, 11, but you can actually write your name there. There's nothing telling you that's wrong. And if you grant this kind of access, when the Wi-Fi manager boots in, it will not work because it's not a valid channel. And on top of that, there are no access controls being enforced. So we need to be careful with these things. Another use case that we actually sometimes come across is deep integrations that go to the drivers. And while it's true that sometimes there is need to go deep, sometimes there isn't really a need. I've seen implementations that go to the driver just to check the Wi-Fi SSID. And the reason why sometimes I come across is because I actually heard this personally was, you know what, if I need to integrate with the IPC level, I have too many APIs out there. It's just too much work for me. So that's why we need to put some effort in standardizing this. Well, if I do it at the driver level, there are probably 2 or 3 drivers which are popular. It's less effort for me. Okay, maybe it's less effort from who is developing service, but this creates a lot of problems for service providers, and it also creates a lot of unexpected results. I've seen implementations that they start messing around with the driver, and suddenly all their services start showing up information which is not consistent with what's actually there. So, and we are talking about the same functionality. So having a specification really helps us, carriers providers, address this kind of issues up front. Reference implementation. Why do we need a reference implementation? Well, I think we heard good reasons yesterday why reference implementations can help. But personally, I think what we really want is more than a reference implementation. What we want actually is having a community implementation. Why? Because while there is value in having reference implementations to value if the work you are doing, sometimes we also need to question ourselves if that's actually the problem that we have. Sometimes the problem that we have is much more simpler. It's just because we are not putting enough effort in actually defining the specifications. And here talking, I'm not saying that we need to spend 1 year defining specifications, but we definitely need to take this matter seriously. Look at other industries, for example. You don't go to a construction company, ask them to build a house, and they tell you, you know what, I'm going to build a house to see if it stands, then I build you a second house to see if it works. No. There could be cases that you could fail sometimes, but most of the times it's just lack of putting effort in doing it the right way. There's really no reason to fail that much. at this stage. So that's why I'm saying that community implementations is what we need. Why? And leveraging one of the questions that we had here yesterday is, okay, if we start working as a community, how can we have an ecosystem that we can all benefit? I think that's a very valid question, and I think one of the answers is because we can do better at effort management, right? We can start offloading the vendors, and we can start putting this common functionality, which is non-differentiating, in the form of a community. Clear examples, right? Would you pay for a smartphone just because it has an app store without any apps? No, the customer will not pay more just because we have an app store, just because we do lifecycle manager. That's just a tool to deliver something. He will pay for the services. He will not pay for the concept of an app store. And we are doing all of this already. So why do it? Why take all this effort alone and do the same thing all over together? Why not do it together, share the effort, do it in a smarter way and more optimized way, and leave for the actual services to drive the revenue? I think that's a smarter way of doing the work. Okay. Another topic which I think it's very important is also talking about test frameworks and certifications. Here I'm going to ask the question in a reverse way. So why not have a common, why not have a certification program and a tool? And I think there's a good reason for doing that, which is from the moment that we have common APIs, why do we need different test cases? You just have a common touch point, you can reuse all this effort again. So again, it's about optimizing and being smarter at how we do things together. And if that wasn't a good reason enough, there's also another benefit involved here, which is resolving bugs early enough, right? If we see a lot of development efforts right there that you create the test case at the same time and you start understanding what is going wrong, right? If you give early feedback to the teams, then you start reducing the bugs, and in the end there will be some cost savings there as well. Then there's also the matter of having clear expectations as well. So personally, I've already spent a considerable amount of time writing requirements, engaging with different suppliers, and I see two big problems. On one hand, if we write too little, they don't understand what we want. On the other hand, if we write too much, they don't read it. So either way, requirements, I mean, obviously they get the job done, but there's always a gap there, right? But there's one thing that everybody understands, which is sharing a test report with clear pass and fail test cases. That one always gets the message done. So I think that having a clear certification or test framework really helps also with defining what you actually expect, what is actual expected behavior. And this also leads to better time to market. And another important point is wider adoption. On and off, I have discussions with different companies about APIs and different kind of things. And many times, the reason for adopting certain initiatives is because there's already a test framework there available. Yes, it's always possible to develop it, but if it's already there, that translates into time to market. It means you do things faster. You know, it's always about how fast you can do things. So as final thoughts, what I want to say with this presentation is I think LCM and selling services is just not a technological matter. It's about, first of all, changing the customer perspective, how they see us, how they see the router. We need to work on changing this. We also need to break down the lifecycle management of the firmware. We cannot afford to release new features in the form of new firmware releases. We need to do this in a deployable, in a dynamic fashion. Thirdly, an enabler is not a differentiator. So I already provided the example why I believe LCM is not a differentiator. It's because it's the same as offering an app store to the customer with no apps. He will not pay for it. He will not pay for it. There's no value there. And lastly, if we do this together and we have a common baseline, we will certainly invite external innovation, and this is already happening. So having that said, I wanted to encourage everybody to join Purple, to be on the calls, to discuss, share your ideas up front. Don't be idea to also challenge the concepts that we have. I think that can be used in a constructive way. So I actually thought this was going to be a short presentation, but it's already 15 minutes long. But in case you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raul. That was, I think, one of the best cases for Purple, not only for LCM, but for Purple in general. So thank you very, very much for the detail. Before you go, no, we have not heard any questions yet. Anyone, any questions? Quite detailed. You answered all the questions. I think that was awesome. So I think I will, with permission of the membership and obviously of you, I think that's a very good Purple 101 presentation. Thank you very much. With that, we'll go for more coffee, more conversations, and hopefully more questions. Thank you very much. See you in 15 minutes at 11:45. Yeah, thank you.
Till death we part, like in our vows. So I wrote this song for you. Now everybody knows that it's just you and me till we're gray and old. Just say you won't let go. Just say you won't let go. Just say you won't let go. Oh, just say you won't let go. I'm done hating myself for feeling. I'm done crying myself away. I gotta leave and start the healing. But when you move like that, I just wanna stay. What have I become? I'm looking through your phone now, oh now. Love to you is just a game. Look what I have done. I'm dialing up the numbers, oh yeah. I don't want my heart to break, baby. How do you sleep when you lie to me? All that shame and all that danger. I'm hoping that my love will keep you up tonight, baby. How do you sleep when you lie to me? All that fear and all that pressure. I'm hoping that my love will keep you up tonight. Tell me, how do you? Love will keep you up tonight. Tell me, how do you? Oh no, how did I manage to lose me? I am not this desperate, not this crazy. There's no way I'm sticking around to find out. I won't lose like that, I won't lose myself. Look what I have done, dialing up the numbers, oh yeah. I don't want my heart to break, baby. How do you sleep when you lie to me? All that shame and all that danger. I'm hoping that my love will keep you up tonight, baby. How do you sleep when you lie to me? All that taking it slowly. I'm afraid to be lonely. Nobody told me it's harder than I thought to tell the truth. It's gonna leave you in pieces, alone with your demons. And I know that we need it, but I've been too afraid to follow through. Hold me close and I won't leave, 'cause it hurts when you hurt somebody. So much to say, but I don't speak. And I hate that I let you stop me, 'cause it hurts when you hurt somebody. I don't know where time went, stuck in the wrong mindset. I let the rules bend when I know that all along they made the break. You got me searching for reason to keep me from leaving, and that I have trouble breathing. I give myself another chance to stay. Hold me close and I won't leave, 'cause it hurts when you hurt somebody. So much to say, but I don't speak. And I hate that I let you stop me, 'cause it hurts when you hurt somebody. One day before you know it, you will see all of the pain and all the harmony. You feel the stinging and you think of me, 'cause it hurts when you hurt. Hold me close and I won't leave, 'cause it hurts when you hurt somebody. So much to say, but I don't speak. And I hate that I let you stop me, 'cause it hurts when you hurt somebody.
Hey, I'm unoriginal, just a BB King singing my blues. Ain't nothing traditional, but I won't think twice to say that I do. Now, I don't know what today is, don't care much for tomorrow. Got my bag and a big dream. I don't know which way is left, right, up or shallow, but I hope you're on the same team as me. Baby, that's me. As me. As me.
I can make it right, I can make it right. If you give me love, I'ma give it to you all night. Never let me go, never let me go. I'ma hold you down, I'ma hold you down, 'cause I got you. Whatever it is, whatever the cost, whatever you want, I'm with you. Whatever you like, whatever you choose. I'm that thing that you take when you in pain. I'm that thought that may never leave your brain. I ain't looking for a better way. I wanna stay for 70 days. I know you got a heart full of pain, but just know I got a heart full of shame. I would do the crime, spend the time with you. Ride or die, go we in the same crew.
Baby, that's me.
look so wonderful in your dress, and I love your hair like that, and the way it falls on the side of your neck, down your shoulders and back. And we are surrounded by all of these lies and people who talk too much. But you got the kind of look in your eyes as if no one knows anything but us. Should this be the last thing I see, I want you to know it's enough for me. 'Cause all that you are is all that I'll ever need. So in love, so in love, so in love, so in love. And you look so beautiful in this light, a silhouette over me. And the way it brings out the blue in your eyes is the Tenerife Sea. And all of the voices surrounding us here fade out when you take a breath. But just say the word and I will disappear into the wilderness. Should this be the last thing I see, I want you to know it's enough for me. 'Cause all that you are is all that I'll ever need. So in love, so in love, so in love, so in love. Do me a darling, Lumiere over me, Lumiere, darling, Lumiere over me, Lumiere, darling, Lumiere over me. Should this be the last thing I see, I want you to know it's enough for me. 'Cause all that you are is all that I'll ever need. So in love, so in love, so in love, so in love, so in love.
You're up, I'm just getting in. So rough, God knows where I've been. Your eyes staring at my sins. There's no time to speak our minds. All of our frustrations on hold. Cause you don't know the life that I know. Standing straight, but I'm off the wall. You need love, but I'm in my zone. I know, I know, I know, I know you deserve better. Someone to give you all the things that I could never. I'd love to be the one that stays with you forever. I don't wanna let you go. I just think that you should know I'm unstable. Oh, 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 I'm unstable. I'm up, you're just getting in. So tough, two wrongs never win. Your hands are pressed against my skin. There's no time to speak our minds. All of our frustrations on hold. Cause you don't know the life that I know. Standing straight, but I'm off the wall. You need love, but I'm in my zone. I know, I know, I know, I know you deserve better. Someone to give you all the things that I could never. I'd love to be the one that stays with you forever. I don't wanna let you go. I just think that you should know I'm unstable.
No. Got good half of the people back. The rest is still. I'm just going to start talking so that people come inside here. I want to make sure this is on camera. So part of our local health team here has given me one of the drinks to get me back to normal performance, up to normal performance levels, and I realized we do need more help from our carrier partners in marketing because apparently Red Bull didn't get the memo how purple is actually spelled. They have too many vowels in here. So can we please reach out to the marketing teams at the other companies and let them know purple is spelled without any vowels? The conversations outside must be so exciting that people don't come back here. Yeah. They're tired of hearing me speak. I'm sure that's it. I get that a lot. Coffee's still going. Maybe we should tell Ali that whenever the bell goes, he stops making coffee, then people come inside. Maybe we do that. For next year, yeah. Oh yeah, and next year, day 2 is not going to start at 9, by the way. 8:30. Just gonna wait a little bit because I want to make sure that you have the full audience here, not parts of them. Okay, apparently we're not going to wait, so we'll just start now. Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming back. Once again, I was very happy about the last session. I'm quite sure that the upcoming session is also going to give you a good idea on the problem space that Purple is trying to address, and that Purple members actually come together to address here in Purple. It's the second sponsor talk. I also want to maybe give a special thanks here to our sponsors that you can see here on the slide. Obviously Smartlogy and then Soft at Home as the main sponsors of the event, and Intel and IOPSIS also sponsoring and helping quite heavily with whatever is needed. We had the first sponsor talk earlier with David here talking about the release of SmartOS 11, and I felt it was maybe, and I was approached after, maybe it didn't come across enough. So what Purple has actually done as a success, and that is something that we need to get out there a little bit more. We set out to change the way the industry actually does build CPE stacks, and the first commercial release is, I think, a very, very strong sign that Purple is in the right spot. We do have the right topics, we do have the right people, and we are actually moving the industry forward. So I think that is quite a success. And that's not limited to one company. That's actually the success of the project. Software release was possible, and there is ongoing development in that area. I think we now have most of the people here, so we're going to the second sponsor talk here with Soft at Home talking about I would say over the last couple of months, it became more and more important to address this topic because various projects that we have in Purple. I don't want to take any time away, so ask David to come up here on stage and talk to us about devices or policy matters. Please welcome David.
Hello. I'm David Jones. I'm a software solution architect for Soft at Home, and working for Soft at Home for the last 8 years. So what's Soft at Home? Soft@Home is a company owned by, operated by a club of operators. We do hardware software separation for the operators. How do we do this? We have our own Linux distribution and middleware stack. As you can see, we are deployed in 22 million homes over 35 countries. And we have almost around 46 million licenses on the sandbox and the gateway, and 5 million licenses on the mobile agents. So what I want to talk to you about today is about network topology and device identification. What is this? That's actually a good question, because if I talk to people here, I get multiple different answers. What you can see here is, for example, something that everybody will have in his home. That's the home gateway. Depending on the size of his home, he will have one or multiple repeaters. And you will find, of course, mobile devices, fixed PCs. They are either connected to the private LAN or to the guest LAN. They can also have a laptop, a hard drive connected to the gateway, or a printer connected to the gateway. And depending on his subscription, he can have FXS or DECT phones. And what we also lately see is a lot of IoT technologies popping up inside the gateway, like, for example, Z-Wave, ULE, UE, and Zigbee. So why do we need to have a better network topology and device identification from the gateway part? First and for all is to improve the end user's information, that he gets more precise information, and to provide more detailed information, and to improve the quality of the LAN network. For example, if you can provide the end user with detailed information about the device, like instead of just providing a MAC address in a web UI, but you can also provide him with the name of his device, what type of device, the IP address, and, for example, the Wi-Fi signal strength, it can most likely solve most of his own problems. Like, for example, in the web UI, you can see that the Wi-Fi signal strength is bad. He can make his own decisions, like, for example, to move the device closer to the access point, or to buy an extra extender inside the network. And in the end, this will reduce the cost for an operator for the help desk. You can also use better device identification for adaptive steering algorithms, that you can push a specific steering algorithm to the device instead of trying to automatically detect it. What you also can do is generate for the operator reports, like, for example, which are the most used devices inside the home, or more importantly, which are the most devices that are behaving badly inside the home and who are causing bad Wi-Fi performance. All these metrics can then be later on used to improve the LAN, so that the operator knows, together with the vendor, where the correct points need to be addressed. And last but not least, if you have proper device identification, you can also push tailored security rules to the gateway. Like, for example, for IoT devices, you can push dedicated firewall rules for them. And for QoS, if you can detect there is a set-top box in the network or a gaming console, you can do the appropriate QoS configuration. So, how did we, as Soft at Home, address this problem? I think we had tried to address it like 5 or 6 years ago when we developed GMAP. GMAP is for us more than just a device identification and network topology system or database that you want to call it. For us, it's actually more like an open framework, a framework that other applications can use to get real-time events on what's happening on the interfaces, the virtual interfaces. And as you can see here, it's not only the fixed and the wireless interfaces that we are addressing, but we are also addressing what's connected through DECT, SIP phones, USB. So actually any interface that's connected to the gateway, we are trying to map and show more information to it. So this is a next slide of topologies that we have integrated in GMAP. USB, PLCs. PLCs, it can either be through 9005 or through HomePlug AV. Multiple discovery protocols, like for example, LTD coming from Microsoft. We implemented a lot of home automation technologies, ULE, Z-Wave, Bluetooth Low Energy, KNX, UE, you name it. We are all mapping them. And virtual devices, like for example, UPnP, USB devices, like for example, a logical partition on hard drive and stuff like that. Now, to come back to network topology, what's basic network topology from a device point of view? It's trying to get the MAC address on the physical interface and then trying to map it out in the system. And depending on the protocol, you can distribute this information from one device to another device. Like for example, you have here the internet, who is connected to the gateway. It's a little bit difficult to show, but the second one on top is the gateway. And the gateway can have a LAN network or a gas network. This will then top in a LAN bridge or a gas bridge with each their own interfaces below it. And depending if there is a device connected to the interfaces or not, you can see that the system is detecting the devices. Like, for example, you have here the W1 interface, where there is a wireless repeater connected through it, and either by using 9005 or our own SSWI protocol, all the layer 2 information and the connected devices of that repeater are being reported back to the gateway. So, a brief introduction on how you can do this for Wi-Fi. For Wi-Fi, you can use the Wi-Fi association list. And for Ethernet, you can use the bridge forwarding table. So now let's talk a little bit about device identification. Again, here, all the information about the devices, they are stored inside GMAP. We have, and GMAP is collecting from the devices all different fingerprints. Like, for example, HTTPS, UPnP, user agents, DHCP, you know, all the common metrics to identify the device. They are stored inside GMAP. They are reported back also to our ISONs, our metric monitoring platform. But to know which device it really is, it's actually our DIL, who is our device information lookup system, who can either use a local database or a cloud to figure out what this device really is. Like, for example, an iPad Air 2 or a Samsung Galaxy S8, for example. And that information is reported back to GMAP and also replied back to the monitoring system. So it's a little bit hard to see, but this is the metrics that our DHCP client is gathering. You can see it has all the DHCP options that has been sent. It has information about the lease time, and it has information about the host name. And for an example, I have also included statistics coming from our UPnP discovery service running inside the gateway. Here for metrics monitoring of the device identification, most of the people, they are looking at server agent and also at the model description. That's very helpful to figure out what the device really is. So how does this high level all work? We have here the maintainer of the system, GMAP core, who has multiple GMAP clients connected to the system, who each client does their own specific task to enrich the topology. For example, the GMAP client is talking to the DHCP server to get the necessary fingerprints and relay to the core, and the same thing for the UPnP client, who is talking to the UPnP discovery service. Small overview of all the different plugins that we have here. I think we went almost over all the fingerprinting technologies, and for PLC monitoring, we have HomePlug IV and 9005. So how does this all look like inside the data model when all this information has been collected? This is an example of how it looks for my Synology NAS at home. So we have the typical structure, devices, .device. And here for an Ethernet device, the MAC address was chosen as the key. We have the friendly name that can be used for the web UI, the device type that can be used to figure out what the device is. And here in this example, you have the client ID, the IP address, the DHCP. So all the useful parameters that are being monitored to give towards an end user or a monitoring system. You have here the example of the device names. So for example, this device was first detected as a PC, but then the MDNS module said, no, I don't think this is a PC. For me, it's the name should be disk station. And then the end user said through the web UI, I want to have Synology NAS as the name of the device. So depending on the priority system that you have here in place, multiple systems, GMAP client plugins, they can do a suggestion of the name. And depending on the priority, the final name will end up at the top of the tree. Here we have the same example for the device types, where we first thought it was a computer. No, MDNS said, I think it's a printer, because it's being announced on the through MDNS as a printer. No, the UPnP says, no, it's a media server, because there is a media service running on it. And through the web UI, I said it should be a storage. And we have the same thing for the multiple IP addresses that we can collect from a device. They are all being stored, and the same for IPv6 addresses. And here is an example of all the DNSSD services that are being announced by that device on the network. As you can see here, it's mostly file sharing that is being announced, printer service, And I think also media rendering, no media rendering through DNS, it's through UPnP, and the web service. So which are actually all the use cases that we have built around this system? Of course, we did network topology, and I have the same problem as Wouter yesterday. A lot of things are just not showing up on the screen. But on the left side, you can see the topology of the gateway. In the middle, there is normally the wireless repeater. And on the right side, you can see that there are which devices that are connected to the repeater. So depending on the skills of your web UI team, you can build a lot of nice topology information web UIs around this technology. Presence detection. Using this system, it's very easily to do to have a kind of a presence detection UI inside your framework, because if the device is actively working inside the network, and if you assign, for example, here the user Misha to this device, and the device is active on the network, you can assume that the device and the home user is at home. Parental control. Parental control, the same problem. You need to have a user configured in the system, multiple users when it comes to a family, and you need to have a UI able to assign devices towards the user. And with this technology, it's easy to do this. In the end, you can say this device is then permanently allowed on the internet, blocked, or has schedule-based access. Security profiles. Here is the same thing over again. What do you need to do? You need to know which devices needs to be monitored inside the network. And when you are discovering a problem with the device, you need to have a system to report back to the device, to the rest of the system. Look here, in my case, my Raspberry lamp, that it has been compromised. Smart Wi-Fi, backhaul selection. What's the problem in a smart Wi-Fi home? It's actually to know, when it comes on selection of the optimal link, is to know which path is the most performant path. Like, for example, on the left side, you have a connection made through Ethernet and to Develo home plug devices. On the right side, you have a network being made purely through Wi-Fi uplink. And here, this repeater needs to make a decision which path is the best path. If you are only going to look at Ethernet or Wi-Fi, you could make the decision, the right side is Wi-Fi, so that's going to be slower than the left side because that's actually Ethernet. Because that's actually the only thing that the repeater sees. It's Ethernet, and my Ethernet uplink port is up. But depending on the technology, you can try to figure out that there is actually a PLC device between it. And if you are going to ask the statistics of the real link speed between the devices, you can make the appropriate decision. Here's an example of QoS, device prioritization. This is a feature that we developed for one of our customers, where a user can make the decision on, I want to give this device a higher priority than the other device. Same problem on to display the devices inside the UI. And since we are using Gmap, we are setting the appropriate flag inside the device topology. And in our case, the QoS management system is using the Gmap framework. So that means he has an open query asking Gmap, can you return me back all the LAN devices with this priority flag set
from the moment it's being set by the web UI, it's getting back in real time an event, and the QoS management module can make the appropriate decisions. IoT. We use this system to make for an agnostic system that a web UI can control the IoT devices without being, without the UI need to know which technology is behind it. So that means that we are creating generic functions like lamp off, lamp on inside the system, and this can then be used. Are there any more questions? Oh, sorry. I hope this one is working.
So probably a couple questions. You know, you've seen this request to start driving applications down into a smart router or a residential gateway. Do you see this as a natural extension of topology?
Excuse me?
So as you see additional services being driven down into the router or into the home, do you see those as being a natural extension of topology? These services usually will carry IP addresses, services connected locally or potentially into cloud. Do you see this as a natural extension?
This can be extended by this as well. So that means if you are connecting the interfaces that you have typically inside a container, and you allow the system to map them, then you can map and say in your topology, look, this is a container running, and at this end of the container, I see this MAC address assigned to it. So you can extend it also for that part if you want to.
Excellent. Right.
So basically for us, in all the examples that I've shown you, this is actually a high-level API. Because if it comes back to applications, an application, they need to know which devices are available inside the home. And depending on what you want to do, like for example, prioritization, monitoring them for security, presence detection, that's actually second what you can do with the parameters that you are making available.
Excellent. And so the second question I have is GMAP and your APIs going to be contributed back to Purple?
Yes, and we, in the presentation from yesterday, we have released all the parameters of this system, the complete data model towards the OPMAP project of Broadband Forum.
Oh, fantastic.
So the data model and the complete API is already available.
Excellent. Thank you.
Can you?
Yeah, thank you. Basically, I will ask from here. My question is regarding what about the privacy? So basically, all the devices that are connected at user home are expanded to the network, to the cloud. So at least some kind of agreement with the user, because your cloud will contain all the information about the types of devices, the security devices at home of the user. So it's like additional breath to the attack or something like this.
Like I said, there is a possibility to have a local database and a remote database, and depending on what you want to opt in for, you will have these part of the services available and not, because like you said, for privacy, there can be some concerns, but all the data that we are sending towards the cloud, they are being anonymized.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? I just want to say thank you to the audience. You are clearly a self-organizing audience. That's very nice, since I missed the queue. Thank you very much, David. Very informative. Thank you. Okay, all the time we lost yesterday, or all the time we were delayed yesterday, we're early today. So we're basically giving you back the time. I just took a peek. I did not have a peach. I just took a peek, and lunch is already being served. So you can all go and enjoy lunch. And then how about we try and be back? Yeah, just 1:15, just 15 minutes early. Okay? Agreement. I hope the food helps. Thank you. See you soon.
Oh, oh, yeah. Even when we both got nothing on, life still finds a way to come between us. Even when we both got nothing on, hate to be your one and only weakness. Cause I know you deserve better. Someone to give you all the things that I could never. I'd love to be the one that stays with you forever. I don't wanna let you go, I just think that you should know. I know you deserve better. Someone to give you all the things that I could never. I'd love to be the one that stays with you forever.